I don't know if you've ever thought about Mother's Day and how important Mother's Day is to God and to creation. If we look back, we'll realize that God said that man was the pinnacle of His creation and that it was very good. And if we think about that in context, we realize that woman was made last. I always think of what heaven's going to be like, because in my household, there's a lot of estrogen and not a whole lot of testosterone. I do have a male dog, and him and I are very friendly. But I wonder about heaven. Because if we think about God and the angels, they are spoken of in the masculine sense, and there are no women in heaven. Well, someday that'll change. I don't think the balance will be shifted, but it will certainly be an interesting place. We are blessed by our mothers. We could not move on. We could not move forward unless we had that nurturing spirit. And I want us to think about that today as we go into this lesson, as we consider the greatest example of a human mother, and that is the mother of Jesus. I wonder what God and the angels discussed as they were thinking about this moment as it was drawing near so many years ago. And as they were looking over God's people, who would God choose? Who would God select to give birth to the Son of God? Now surely Mary must be one of the greatest women that ever walked on the face of the earth. And we can tell by the story that we're going to go into a little bit about her character, a little bit about the qualities that she had. As I think about this story, you'll remember this is one of the only stories we have of Jesus as a young child. We have some about him until he's probably about 2 or 3 years old. We know that his father and his mother escaped to Egypt, and then not long after that returned back to Israel. So we know a little bit about his early childhood, but we know very little about his upbringing, very little about his teenage years and his young adult years. But we have this story, an interesting story. And it's a story that captures our imagination, because we can imagine what it must be like for a mother to find out her child is lost. You'll remember in the story, it is the custom of Jesus' family to go to the Passover to celebrate that feast. From what we understand in the story, they would travel in this big band of people down to Jerusalem. They would travel with all their family and their friends, people that they knew from the town where they were from. And it would be a worship experience all the way down and all the way back, as they would celebrate what it meant to be a child of God. Well, on this one occasion, we remember from the story that Jesus stayed behind. And it took them a day to figure out that He wasn't there. And it's at this point that I begin to think about every kind of experience that I can, to try to understand what might have been going through Mary's mind. And one of my favorite movies comes to mind, and perhaps some of you have seen it, but it's the movie Home Alone. You remember the movie Home Alone? You remember when Kevin's mother finds out that they left Kevin at home. Of course, they're on this trip to a foreign country. They're on the way to Paris. And Kevin's left at home in his house in Chicago. And of course, it's every mother's nightmare that they lose their child. And I don't know if you remember in the story, they're all around the vans that are about to take them to the airport, and they're counting heads. And the annoying neighbor's kid comes over, you remember, and he gets in the van and he's talking to everybody, and everyone's trying to get rid of him because they want to get on this trip. And he has the same color hair as Kevin. And as his mother looks into the van, someone's counting, and they get a head count, and everything's good. But it's not Kevin. Because remember, Kevin got in trouble, and he was sent up to sleep in the attic, which he hated. He was afraid of the attic. And he wakes later that morning to find that his family is gone. And of course, when his mother finds out, she's going to move heaven and earth to get back home. And if you haven't seen the story, I encourage you to do it. But I want you to think of Mary and her experience. Now, we often overlook many of the details of the story. Okay, so after one day, as they're traveling back, she probably starts looking around to see if she can see him. By this stage, she must have several other children as well. So she's going through the list of all the children, probably messing up the names. You know how that goes? Your mothers do that. Call you by another name until eventually they come around to it. Then she realizes Jesus is not there. So for a whole day, Jesus has been on his own. She's wondering if he's lost along the journey. And then they decide to head back to Jerusalem. And you remember, it's 3 days more that they look until they eventually find him. Have you ever wondered where Jesus spent 3 nights? Ever wondered what he ate? Maybe the image you conjure up in your mind is Jesus in the temple, and it's 12 o'clock at night, and everyone's gone home, and what is he doing? We don't often think about that. I wonder if his mother asked him. From the story we find that when he's in the temple and he's discussing with the scribes and the lawyers as they go back and forth with questions and answers as Jesus interacts with them, we realize that they are astonished. They're amazed at how well he understands God's Word. They're amazed at his wisdom. But we're also told from the story that when his parents get there, they're amazed too. Let's look at the passage starting in verse 48 of Luke chapter 2. It says, "When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, 'Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you.' 'Why were you searching for me?' he asked. 'Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?' But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." Now, I don't know in your upbringing if you were able to put your mother through these kinds of experiences. I know I did with my mother. The other day, I relayed to her how proud I was of her, that she was such a tough woman. She thinks she's frail, but she's actually pretty tough. I think there were times when I'm sure she wondered whether I'd make it home. I don't know if you'd put your parents through that, put your mother through that. I always try to think back to what Mary was thinking as she's frantically looking for Jesus. And then she finds him. Usually when we look for something that is lost, we usually find it in the last place we'll look, right? That's usually how it works. It's the last place. My problem is I always lose something in a very safe place. Do you do that? I have a very safe place. I think, what's the safest place I can put this particular item? And I put it there. And it's so safe, even I forget. Then later I come and I look for it. I can't find it. Jesus ended up in the safest place he could be. Probably the last place she would look, but it's the safest place he could be. Maybe she should have asked herself, why didn't I look here first? Haven't you asked yourself that? Why didn't you look first at the last place you'll look at, and then you'll find it? Well, Jesus is in this place, and she finds him. I don't know what she must have felt like, but the Bible tells us here in this story that she was anxiously searching for him. She was really concerned. Now, we don't think about it, but Mary had other concerns that our mothers did not have. You got to realize that it wasn't just that there was these everyday dangers just being a child in the world today. Because a child is very vulnerable, and we know that. And that's why we watch over them more closely. But there are more sinister things at work in Jesus' life. If people were to know who he was, he'd be in danger with the authorities. If Satan were to find out where he was, he'd be in danger with the spiritual principalities. This was a very vulnerable time in Jesus' life. When he could stand on his own and protect himself, that'd be one thing. But being a young child like this, he was very vulnerable. And his mother knew that. But I think out of this story we can learn some things about our mothers. First of all, I think from this story we've got to understand that Mary was a very protective mother. A good mother always protects. That's what a good mother does. Notice from verse 49. Jesus says, "Why were you searching for me?" And he says, "Don't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" She looked for him until she found him. Maybe she finds him in that last place. And Jesus is concerned that she would be looking for him, but he's not his mother. He's on a mission to do what his Father wants him to do, but she is on a mission to make sure that he gets there. Jesus here is getting ahead of himself as a child does. He's not ready to be on his own yet, and his mother has to reel him in and say, "It's not right yet, it's not time yet." But if you notice, Jesus says, "Why are you looking for me? Don't you know where I should be?" I always think about 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the greatest passage on love. And there's this line in there. It says, "It always protects." Love always protects. Now I think this passage here, we often use it in weddings. But I believe this passage not only speaks of one person's love for another person, but it also speaks of God's love for us, because love is ultimately how God is described. God is love. John will describe God that way. And in this description of love, we have this saying right here. This is a quality of God which we know our mothers have. That's how mothers are. I was talking to my mother about several occasions when I was a child. I would, without telling her, make plans to go and do something, and usually it was over the weekend. So on one occasion, I remember my friends had decided they wanted to go fishing, so we got our motorcycles, we loaded up all our gear on our motorcycles, and we just took off. It was Friday afternoon, the sun was going down. We needed to get to where we were going to go before the sun got down, because there's nothing like looking for firewood in Africa in the dark. Because sometimes the firewood, when you pick it up, it moves. You know what I mean? So you don't want to be looking for firewood in Africa in the dark, so we would just take off. And I wouldn't think about it until Sunday afternoon. I'd come home. My mother would say, "Where have you been?" "I've been fishing." "Why didn't you tell me?" Oops. Children do that, don't they? But mothers are thinking about what their children are doing. Mothers are thinking about how to keep them safe. And so when I was talking to my mother about that, I was thinking about how she thinks about all of those things. As a child, we don't think about those things. We're just running ahead. We're thinking everybody's on the same mission we're on, but oftentimes they are not. This is the mindset of the mother that she protects. Sometimes we don't like that mindset because we're afraid that our mothers are going to hold us back. They're not going to let us go. I think that's a hard part of being a parent, is letting your child go. And Mary is not prepared to let Jesus go at this time. But also, look at verse 50. We find that mothers wait on the Lord. Verse 50. But they did not understand what he was saying to them. When he was saying, "I need to be about my Father's business," they didn't quite grasp what he was trying to say. They didn't quite understand the impact of that statement. But Mary was prepared to find out. She was prepared to wait. She was prepared to do what she needed to do to make sure that Jesus got to that point. I think this is the hardest thing about being a mother. I remember my father would always say, "It's okay, he's a boy, he needs to do those things. He'll be okay. You know, we can patch him up afterwards, stitch him up afterwards, take him to the hospital afterwards. But he needs to do those things." And a mother has to wait. A mother has to wait and pray and hope that everything turns out okay. Listen to what the psalmist says, Psalms 27 and 14. It says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." I think that's the hardest thing. Sometimes we think of it in terms of patience. If there's a prayer you shouldn't pray, it's praying for patience. If you pray for patience, you will be tried, and you will learn patience. But if you want to go ahead and pray for patience, go ahead and pray. But as a Christian, it's something that is a part of us. And certainly our mothers exhibit this quality. Sometimes they can't be there wherever we are. But they pray. And they hope. And they wait. I think oftentimes it's easier for us to go through a bad experience, a difficult experience, but to see somebody else go through it is far more difficult. And unfortunately, that's what mothers have to do. They have to watch their children go through all kinds of difficult experiences, and they can't do that for them. They have to wait. If we think of Mary, what she was anticipating for Jesus' life, I'm not sure she really understood, because from this passage, we know that she didn't. What was ahead of her? She had heard all these wonderful things. You'll remember when Jesus is taken to the temple, they speak of Jesus in such wonderful terms, but also there is this warning. There is a hint of what lies ahead. And Mary doesn't fully understand, but she waits. She waits. You'll remember one of the last images we have of Mary is her below the cross. Remember that? It's close to the end. And Jesus looks at John and he says, "Your mother." And he looks at his mother and he says, "Your son." And then Mary knows what's about to happen. It's not just in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense as well. I think Mary was the epitome of someone who prayed and who hoped and who waited. And then finally, a good mother treasures all the good memories. Notice what it says in 51. "Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them, but his mother treasured all these things in her heart." And then back to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Love keeps no record of wrongs. If it keeps no record of wrongs, it keeps the record of all the rights. It keeps the memory of all the good things. Mothers keep the memory of all the good things. We are told here that's what Mary did. She filled her heart with all of these good things. Maybe she had an idea of what was ahead. Maybe she was appreciating every moment. Maybe she lived for every moment. Maybe she knew that that's how she was going to be able to deal with potentially what was ahead. I encourage you to think about what a good mother would do with her memories. That she's thinking of all these good things. It's amazing how when we turn to Mom, and we need that support and that encouragement and that love, it is there. Because they're thinking about all the good things. They've stored up all the good things. Jesus goes home, it says, to the temple. And there is a wrestling that is taking place within his heart and his mind, because there is a spiritual home, and then of course there's the physical home. It's a wonderful thing when we have a mother that understands both. Understands her importance to her family, and yet understands her importance to God. I think Mary's ability to be able to protect her child, to be able to wait on God, is all because she understood what the ultimate goal was. She understood that it was about God's will and not her will. But she had a memory of all that was good that Jesus had done. Love keeps no record of wrong, but it keeps a really good record of all those good things. I encourage you to think about a good mother. Think about the qualities of a good mother, the protector that she is. Think about her patience. Think about her perseverance. And then ultimately think about all those good things that she remembers. And doesn't remind you of all the bad things that you have done as a child. There is a different quality in a mother than in a father. And it's a wonderful thing that God has created the family as He has. That He has created something that has never existed before. The concept of a nurturing mother. I want you to think about your mothers this week and think of what a difference they've made in your life. As women, there are examples that we can live up to, like Mary's. As we think of our parents, our grandparents, all the examples we have, God has truly blessed us. And you are especially blessed if your mother has not only thought about this world, but also the life to come. That your mother has not only been concerned about your well-being in this life, but your well-being in the life to come. Then you are blessed beyond all others. Mother's Day is not a normal gospel sermon, but we all would not be here today if it was not for our mothers. So if there's someone out there today that's been studying and know what they need to do, then this is your opportunity to respond. But also if you need some help in any way, we want to help you. We want to pray for you, we want to take care of you, and this is your opportunity to come and to share that with